Before I even start this video, let us all collectively, like a bunch of Soviets, gawk at this thumbnail. Holy shit, I bait, but this is like another level. Cody on the thumbnail should also be a red flag because Cody has expressed his political opinions on this channel very few times. And even when he has, most people would argue that he's somewhere in a centrist or a moderate left-wing area. This is politically nowhere near either Rudyard or Msir Z. Also, Rudyard of What If Altist is very far from alt-right. He has gone on several tangents on his own channel where he talks about how much he hates the alt-right. He's flashed his hate boner so much that Ben Shapiro would be jealous. Okay, so this is post-edit me talking. He didn't even mention Cody nor Rudyard in the video. Hell, Cody put a comment down below. So why the hell would you put him in the thumbnail? I put Kraut in my thumbnail, but that's because I actually talked about Kraut in my video. Alright, let's actually watch the video.
The objective historian. History is not past events. History isn't even a retelling of past events. History is a story, a narrative. It's written by historians investigating sources. The narrative forged from these historical sources is incredibly powerful, capable of completely reshaping the way we understand the world. Because of this, history is, in my mind, not only a tool for propaganda, it is, in and of itself, propaganda. To give an example, much history has been written about the American Civil War, and for a time, in some areas, the prevailing historical narrative was that the US Civil War was fought to safeguard the rights of states to legislate their own policy without interference from the federal government. In some circles, this is still the prevailing narrative. You can arrive at this conclusion if you exclusively rely on sources that seek to emphasize these aspects in propaganda during the war, or in propaganda after the war that sought to rationalize and whitewash the Confederate cause. The accepted historical account, however, is that the American Civil War was sparked by the South seceding in order to protect the economic interests of slave owners.
Alright, so I already did this in a video. I don't think I got my point across very well. I might remake it in the future, but the lost cause is a very real thing. And just a reminder, this is coming from someone who was raised on the narrative that the American Civil War was about slavery.
Another example might be the story of Christopher Columbus's discovery of the Americas, which in history textbooks, even Norway when I was growing up, did not adequately account for the utter depopulation of the Caribbean that his greed-fueled slave venture caused.
Slave-driven? Slavery wouldn't even be a motive to explore the New World until later Spanish expeditions. As much as Columbus was a mass murderer and disease spreader, there aren't any accounts that he was out for slaves. Columbus was out for Asia and the spice trade because Portugal took control of that. The reason why he sailed west was to keep the newly reunified Spain competitive in enlightened Europe, because Portugal was stealing the limelight on the Iberian Peninsula.
I'm not making any of this up.
Oh, but you are.
My point being that even if either of these accounts are more correct by the standards of historians in their fields, they're nonetheless neither objective nor factual retelling of events, because none of the historians writing these things were there. They are narratives based on available sources, attempting as much as possible to reach some semblance of historical truth. There's no such a thing as a concrete final narrative of history on any subject.
I kind of just skimmed this segment because it was just an overview of what alternate history is to anyone who's unfamiliar. So we're going to give him a new slate. We're going to pretend like he didn't just try to rewrite history in the first 2 minutes of the video.
This makes many of these works have propagandistic elements, as I mentioned. This doesn't mean they're all sinister.
This just sounds like alternate history is bad unless it agrees with my viewpoint in life. And then he proceeds to show a picture of Obama front and center.
Here's a video from a channel called Monsieur C, or Monsieur Z, or Monsieur Z, I don't know. Before I talk more about this guy, Mr. Z, let me play a very short clip from his video. The name of the video is What If the Bay of Pigs Invasion Succeeded? Thesis here is to say Cuba bad because communism, just as I hope it's abundantly clear that my thesis in the previous section was to say post-revolutionary Cuba did a lot of good, and Cuba's alignment with the Soviet Union must in part be blamed on strategic missteps by the United States, who could have had a friendly Cuba.
What point are you trying to make? You didn't prove that Msir Z was trying to spin a false thesis of history. All you did was spin one yourself and say, yeah, this is the objective truth, and you're objectively wrong. Dude, I can make one right now by saying the embargoes are justified because they're against the human rights abuses done by the Castro administration, such as the mass deportation of their own citizens leading to a refugee crisis in South Florida and the illegal arming of nuclear weapons from the Soviet Union. Something that you mention is that embargoes don't block essentials such as food, water, and medicine. Something that you ignore is that money mailed from families in the States to relatives in Cuba is also not blocked by the embargo, even though most of the money ends up in the hands of the Castro administration anyways. As much as you can make the argument that the US's blockade against Cuba is choking Cuba to death, the oppressive regime has been parasitically sucking resources out of the US for a continued existence, and thus the failings and ill wills of the everyday Cuban is entirely the works of Castro and his cronies. Wait a damn minute, that's your game from the start of the video! You firmly put your arguments in the reality of objectivism and say that there is no truth. So then you can just use any theory of history which is set in the reality of concrete truth and just say, well, objectively this is wrong, so it's wrong.
So what might on the surface seem to be a benign piece of alternate history could be a veiled attempt at propagandizing deeply problematic worldviews or deeply flawed ideas about history. This can be especially damaging if the thesis of the historian, almost said alt-right historian, builds off of outright nonsense and ahistorical perspectives or ideas, because a person producing the work doesn't actually understand history.
The only reason why they don't understand history is because you don't agree with them. You're saying that there is no truth until you flip-flop and say, but my truth is more truthful. This is the perfect argument because you can just say, objectively, you're wrong, I'm right, no need to further elaborate. And you can't say I'm strawmanning you because that's literally your entire argument, because when you actually came down into the muck of the set in stone, you were rewriting history like the alt historians you were criticizing. Diabolical and hypocritical. Well, this has been a waste of my time. This has been Mr. Asian Pie. See you on the flip, and don't be stupid.